Hi, I'm Jon Tsourakis with the Digital Mastermind. You're listening to The Climb. This is where agency owners and leaders tune in to get growth tips and strategies for growing their businesses. All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is episode 5. It's going to be a lot of fun. But before we get into that, which today's theme is going to be selling an agency and starting another business. But there is one thing I would like to mention before we get into that. I'd like to make an announcement. My partner in crime, or my former partner in climb, David McGraw, has quit. I have a note from him right here. And it says, "Dear John, the ratings were too low. I quit. Best of luck." So, all right, it's a big loss, right? That's fine, but we're going to do our best to press on. So, and life after an agency is what I want to talk about today. And in fact, our guest last week, Gabe, sold an agency only to start another one 4 years later. But today I have Taylor Trusty, who's going to talk about this among some other things. Thank you for joining us today, Taylor Trusty.
Thank you for having me.
You're too confident in that retort there. All right. So
you like that?
I do. Before we get into everything, I'd like to state your business profile. So feel free to stop me if any of this stuff isn't accurate, right? I like to give everybody a big picture of who you are. So you're from Louisville, Kentucky, now living in New York City. You started as a programmer when you were a teenager. You're the founder of Blackstone Media, which you sold in October of 2018. You've owned multiple businesses in the marketing and tech space, starting with Hobby Age Sports when you're actually a teenager. You're now a sought-out speaker, educating and entertaining the world on entrepreneurship, digital marketing, and usability. And you have two prime ventures right now, Signal Insights and Trusty Index. Is that all that accurate?
Yeah, sounds very flattering when you say it.
You're just a humble guy. All right. So the first question I'd like to get into is the word entrepreneur, right? It's on your profile. Some of the other things, there's no name calling it, but like, how overused is this word today? I mean, what the hell? Okay, so I mean, in all fairness, granted, you clearly own businesses, as have I, right? But it seems like everybody is an entrepreneur, and I think we need to find another term. Like, should we just go back to like business owner and take the whole French word out of this?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So I'm part of Entrepreneurs Organization, which I guess is part of why I put entrepreneur on there, which kind of goes to show how overused the word is. I think it's a good point. I haven't thought of it. But, I think that there's this Hacker News thread about how maybe with the fall of WeWork and with the fall of some of these companies that have really romanticized startups, and maybe we'll just go back to the old terms of like small business owner, like you're saying. So I think it's a good point, and I agree with you. There's nothing wrong with, as a matter of fact, I think there's this value and this longevity of a business that's been around for 30 years and is profitable and is boring. That's great. That's the way maybe business should be.
Yeah, there should like be a distinction, right? It's like, oh, that person's a doctor. They have like a certificate or something. It's just and it's cool. I mean, I love all people, but like you're in the airport and you're next to a guy's like, I'm an entrepreneur. It's like, really? What is it that you do? I started a one-person valet business. It's like, all right, you park cars. That's cool. Nothing against people that park cars. It's just, I think there's clearly a distinction there, and everybody, it's really cool to be an entrepreneur right now, apparently. And ironically, you're actually in a WeWork, even though you mentioned WeWork, right?
I'm not in a WeWork. I'm in a WeWork similar to, it's called Betaworks, but it's a similar type of space. Yeah.
Got it. It's a work space.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's actually owned by a VC firm. So I think that they, probably started it to source investments, but yeah, it's great. I love it here.
Okay. All right. So I want to get into your agency. You had it for 13 years. First question is, do you miss owning it?
No.
Great answer. Did you build it to sell it?
No. I mean, I was 20 when I started it. I started it as I actually co-founded it. So I was 50-50 partner to start, and then I bought out my partner after 4 years. So, we were at lunch, and he goes, I was a programmer and he was a designer, and he goes, look, I have these clients, and I'd like to make this a bigger business. Would you like to kind of partner up and start a new company, and I'll move over my clients into the business? And so that was over lunch, and I said, yeah, sure, sounds good. And then he said, how about 50-50? And I said, sounds good. And that was it. Frankly, I thought the company would last 6 months. And, I would make some money, and then I'd figure out what I really wanted to do. And then we ended up getting this $30,000 contract, which was may as well have been $30 million at the time. And then we got an office, and then from there, I guess my point is that none of it was intentional. It all just kind of, it was just like we made this decision, and then we hired an employee, and then we hired, and then you sign a 3-year lease, and all of a sudden I'm in this kind of snowball that is really difficult to stop.
It was organic.
It was organic, and in some ways, I'm nothing against that, but in some ways, like my new company is very purposeful from the start. So it's like, okay, let's think through what 5 years looks like. What does 10 years look like? We're building this company really to sell it, and so that's a whole different game, and so it's very different now than it was then. But to answer your question, no, I didn't start it to sell it. As a matter of fact, I tried selling it several times. When you and I met. And I met Jeb Banner, who at the time ran an agency in Indianapolis. I remember I tried to sell my company to him, and he's like, no. I did, and he goes, no, dude, this is an unsellable entity.
So you're trying to get out of it, like you. So I've known you since 2012, so almost 8 years. So all right. So you were trying to get out of it for a long time.
I was trying to get out. So that was in early 14 when I'd broken my foot, I'd broken up with my girlfriend, and I wanted to move to New York. So I lived in Kentucky, and I couldn't find a way to move. And I thought the only way I'm gonna be able to move is by getting out from this business. It felt like an anchor because I was so in it, in an agency world, it's so hard. Like when can you can't wind down an agency. It's so hard because all the contracts are, none of them start at the same time and end at the same time. What are you going to do? Like lay off half the employees? What are the rest of them all quit? Like I just couldn't come up with a scenario. It was in a lease. Like I couldn't come up with a scenario where I could just cleanly move on, which is what I wanted. That was, so 4 years later, it finally happened.
Really? Sorry. So at that time, did you have the intention of selling it, and it took you 4 years to make something more sellable, like you contacted a broker, or was that also organic where you're like, okay, this opportunity just came up and now I have the ability to leave?
I didn't think it was sellable.
Okay.
Is the
Why
truth. Because people kept telling me that, and also that helps or hurts. But I think that it was in my head. So a lot of it was in my head. I was like, what are people buying? All that kind of thing. A lot of it was kind of self-talk in a negative way. So that was bad. But it turned out it was sellable, and there was a lot of value created. And selling is all about who wants to buy it. So we can theoretically say that it has value and it's worth this or it's worth that, but none of that matters unless there's a buyer. So until a buyer entered the equation, until that buyer entered, I didn't think it was sellable, because the truth is that it wasn't. In order for it to be sellable, it has to be buyable. There's two parts of the market here. And so until they entered the picture, it really wasn't sellable because nobody was willing to buy it. So when they entered the picture, then,
you know what I mean? Like, how active were you in trying? Because I've talked to some people about trying to sell something, and it's like, I want to sell it. And then there's people that are really knocking on every door. And granted, I know you don't want your staff to know, dude,
right.
You're really trying to whore us out here. What are you doing? There's this weird dynamic. And granted, you want to be transparent, but you don't want to be too forward with it. It's like holding your position, posture, poker face, however you want to say it. So were you super active, or was this just more of a thought, yeah, I want to sell it. I talked to a couple people and it's not sellable?
Yeah, more the latter. So, I mean, doing it all again, I would have done a much more active process. I would have hired a broker. I would have, my partner in my new business, we had breakfast this morning, and we were talking about this. He sold his company same time I did for a lot more money, and he was like, well, next time I'm going to hire an investment banker, which is a whole different level. But that was I was like, I agree. I should have hired a broker. Like, I would have made a lot more money, had a lot better terms, et cetera, if I had hired a broker. You hire, live and learn. So live and learn. It was a good experience. But I'm not complaining. I'm very happy to move. I mean, the reality is that I didn't admit to myself that I wanted out of the business. And that's where it started. I wasn't truthful with myself. So I kind of played these games where I would say, ooh, I want out. And I wouldn't fully commit to being out, or I wouldn't hire a broker, for instance, right? Had I fully committed and said, you know what, over the next 12 months, I want out of this business. So what are the steps I need to do? I need to hire a broker. I need to hire an accountant to do a forensic audit so that I know this stuff instead of finding out during due diligence. I need to start networking, and who do I know in the industry that would be willing to buy, and what does that look like, and what do they care about? Who has sold in the past that I can interview and talk to them and see what they learned through that process? There were a lot of things that if I'd been more strategic about it and I would have done it differently, then it would have had a better outcome. Not necessarily a different outcome, I would have had a better outcome. And not that I had a bad outcome, but I could have had an even better outcome.
Right. Yeah, you could have maximized it. Do you think you're romantic about it and that's why you didn't follow that path?
Well, I think it's back to the question you asked, right? It was more of, and it was all organic. So, somebody reached out to me and they said, would you be willing to sell? And I was like, yeah. And then we kind of like went.
I wasn't aware of that. All right, that works. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just kind of like went along this process, and had it been more intentional, it just would have been a different process is all.
Okay. Now, what does one do? I've heard different things when one sells an entity such as an agency. I know some people have said it's a sense of loss. I've had others that was like, dude, that was the greatest thing of my life. Like, what was it for you?
Well, it was so the due diligence process was really intense. I had chest pains. I thought I was having panic attacks. I went to the emergency room, went to urgent care. So it was really, really intense. The valuation got cut significantly right at the end. There were a number of things that
drama,
and a lot of drama. And so right up until we actually signed, I didn't know if it was going to happen. We had said August 31st was the day I actually sold it. And that day, I remember, we were like, you know what, it's either going to happen today or it's not going to happen. So it's either the end of August or that's it. It wasn't necessarily me saying that, it was both parties. And so it's like today or never. Either we walk away or we're done. And so I signed, in my apartment by myself. It was so anticlimactic given how kind of like there was so much buildup. And then I'm just like, I literally am sitting on the couch in my apartment alone, and I'm like clicking the button that says electronic e-signature, fill it out. And that was it. Like, I remember I was supposed to go on a date that night. And so the whole thing is like, this date was supposed to be at 6 o'clock. And I was like, either it's going to be a celebratory date or it's going to be horrible. And so I messaged her and I'm like, hey, I'm going to be 30 minutes late or something. And which is a really shitty thing to do. And
yeah,
in addition,
first date? Was this a first date?
It was a second date. And in addition to that, the place was right next to my apartment. Like, it was right downstairs. And so to her, like, she was already on her way. And to me, I was just like, oh, I'm going downstairs 30 minutes late. And so I show up and I'm like, I'm really sorry. And I start crying. Oh yeah. She's like, what happened? What happened? And I was like, I just sold my company. And she's like, oh, okay. Are you happy? Or I can't understand. Are you crying? And I wouldn't stop crying. Like, I was like crying that night, and then the next day, and it's just like, and it didn't work out, needless to say. Like,
Were you crying because you're happy, or were you cry like was it just like releasing this,
I think it
this?
was, yeah, it was like, it was releasing. It was, yeah, I was, I was just relieved. I was glad it was over. I didn't know what I was going to do next. Like that was the other thing. Because to your point, it was just this organic, it's just a series of events that instead of having intentionality and instead of me being like, okay, again, if I'd thought about it 12 months in advance or said, this is my intention, here's what I want to do next, here's what that looks like. I just kind of went with the punches and I just kind of let it go. And then all of a sudden it ends, right? Like, okay, it's done. And I had this is one of the things about the sale. Initially, I was going to go along, like I was going to be on as a consultant and I was going to, yeah. And then that all got cut at the very end. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, like that's it. Like I'm done today. Like, I signed the documents and that's it. Like, I have nothing to do on Monday. So that was also really jarring. And I didn't know what to do without that structure. All of a sudden I didn't have employees, I didn't have clients, and I don't have emails coming in. And that was a very different, I hadn't had that experience since I was 19, 13, 14 years.
Wow. Yeah, that had some serious impact on you. So how did that date go? Was that the last date? I mean,
yeah, I think we went on probably like two more.
Oh, did you really? You got two more. Okay. Wow.
I'm certain she thought I was a head case. She's like, wow, this guy's like really falling apart at the seams. But, it is what it is. But yeah, but one of the best pieces of advice I got was go away on this, go rent a cabin in the woods. That's what this guy David told me to do. So I did. So I rented a cabin in upstate New York. I rented a car and I drove up there for 3 days.
Sounds like somebody going to commit suicide to me.
Well, there was no cell phone coverage or anything, so nobody would have even known,
Right. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. The woods, no, and you just
I took 2 books, I took a journal, and I had no cell phone coverage. I went up there and it rained the entire time, nonstop. And I remember all I did was read and journal. And I was like, what do I want to do? And who do I want to be? And am I up? One of the things I wrote down is, who am I without a company? And I really, to your point about entrepreneur, I really aligned with this idea of like, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a business owner. And if I no longer have a company, am I an entrepreneur? Like, what am I? Should I go work for somebody? Am I going to start another agency? What, and to be clear, like my sale wasn't not like retirement money or anything. Like I still need an income. And so what do I live in an expensive city. What am I going to do? Like what? So thinking about those things, was a lot of what I thought about. And really, like I look back on that time, and it took a lot longer than I would have thought. Like, that was basically, that was 14, 15 months ago. And really until we just closed our round of funding for this new company 10 days ago.
Congratulations.
So, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. So that's a big gap. And at the time, I wouldn't have thought that, it would have taken that long.
Yeah. So it sounds like you found like your identity in the last 15 to 16 months.
Yeah, I think, for me, a lot of my identity was wrapped up in who are my clients? How many employees do I have? All these awards that we won. I like this old idea of, do you want to be rich or do you want to be king? Like, these are the reasons that people start companies, rich or king. And I did it for king. Like, I liked saying, look, I have all these employees and look at, come to my office, hey, I love the glory. Yeah. And then when all that's gone and by the way, in New York, nobody knew or cared who my company was. So I also didn't have this structure of like really close friends that I had in Kentucky. When I moved, I lost all that. So it was a good learning experience, and I'm still going through it, right? Still growing learning experience.
Wow. All right. No, I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, we got a little deep there. I love it, man. That's what happens here on The Climb.
That's right.
So another deeper question. What do you have against Jeff Bezos? You canceled your Amazon Prime earlier this year. What's going on, man?
Well, I have nothing against him, obviously. Not obviously, but I gave this talk in Estonia a month ago or so at this e-commerce. Right. Yeah, this e-commerce summit, and I had it was in this huge theater and had this huge screen, and one of my slides was about, actually probably 3 of my points were about Amazon. And so they're on this big screen, and I'm just talking about how it's like all really going to hell. and I didn't mean for it to come across that way, but afterwards people came up and they're like, wow, you really hate Amazon, don't you? And I was like, no. I was like, no. So it's funny to hear you say that. But
it looks like it, dude. I saw some posts on your social media, and I was like, yeah, our researcher brought it to my attention. I was like, yeah, this is interesting. Yeah, I see some hate there. Yeah. That's
true. So, I think Amazon has a lot of marketplace issues. There's a lot going on there. They have a bunch of counterfeit issues, and there's this, I think there are a lot of issues there. But you clearly can't argue with success.
It's the company as a whole, right? It gets this giant unwieldy thing, and much, right? It could be a great company in a lot of respects, but there's a lot of really bad things.
Yeah. Well, I think that, I'm not a fan of companies of any type, but especially tech companies wielding influence. So when they, in an anti-competitive fashion, wield influence. So for instance, Amazon driving consumers to their own product lines, companies like Walmart have been doing, and Target have been doing in person for years, or for decades, and there's nothing wrong with that. But Amazon does it to such a degree, and in some ways, I think it's really slimy and misleading. So that there are a number of these things that it's a slippery slope to where it just keeps going down this path.
You would say I think is,
I would say what?
Would you say they are an unethical company?
Well, they certainly have unethical qualities. Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's fair to say that they're as a whole unethical, but they've certainly done unethical things and consistently do them. In my opinion, and I very well could be wrong, but when I talk to friends here who work with them or who work at Amazon, what's hilarious is that you get these people, out for drinks, the things they say, and yeah. Just leave it at that.
Well, we lost Amazon as an advertiser on this show. Thank you for that, Taylor. I appreciate that. All right.
They probably wouldn't have paid their bill anyway.
What's that?
They probably wouldn't have paid their bill anyway.
It sounds like, oh yeah, this sounds like some hate. All right. Speaking of some of those, you've done a ton of speaking lately. So with everyone from the World Trade Center of Kentucky, did know that there was one in Kentucky. So that's interesting. To the American Advertising Federation, to the Estonian E-commerce Association. I know you're a charming guy, but did you hire a publicist or something? How are you getting all these speaking engagements? What's going on?
Yeah, so at Blackstone, our last company, this was a big part of our sales effort, was getting me speaking. So I hired a former journalist, and she ran these efforts for us. So at my peak, I was doing about 40 to 45 talks a year.
Wow.
So it was a lot. And, most of them were smaller groups, right? They're not all conferences. These are, speaking at Rotary clubs, speaking, so basically if there was a group of people and they had a platform, I'd come in there and speak. So, and it's just I would give them, or Leslie, who worked for us, would give them kind of here's what Taylor could talk about. And then they say, could you come in and talk about, I mean, literally the Estonia people said, could you come in and talk about Amazon? And I was like, I would love to. And then, others are like, could you talk about tech trends? And I'm like, sure. Like, I'll talk about anything.
Like, whatever it is, dude. Like, so what is your prep for this? Do you like wing it, or do you, like, tell me about you? What's your process for a talk?
Well, now it's much more formalized. But we interview, who's going to be there? What are they looking for? So I ask a lot of questions about what the expectations are, and then frame it around that. So what's the group, like, what would make them really happy? What kind of takeaway would be really valuable for those that are attending? What are they expecting? For the Estonian talk, I said, how good is everyone's English? So I talk really fast, and so I had to purposely slow down because I didn't want people losing some light here. Because I didn't want people to get lost. So yeah. But there's that. So I asked about who's the audience, what are the goals, why are you bringing me in, what would be a runaway success? It's like sales. So if you're hiring me to do a job, what would make this a big success? And then I take notes, and then I run, here's what I'm thinking. So I'm thinking I'm going to talk about, these 9 e-commerce trends. Are there certain things I ask what's off limits? Is there anything you don't want me to talk about? Like, don't talk about Russia. Okay.
That, really?
Well, I mean, different people have said like different things that they don't want me to talk about, and I'm like, okay, don't talk about China.
All right, this is Putin over here.
He's a good friend of mine, So.
Now I see. All right. Would you say Jeff Bezos is America's Putin? Is that?
No, I think he's fine.
All right. So, so based on your agency, did that turn into sales for you?
Oh, for sure. It was our top sales channel.
Really?
Oh yeah. So like the World Trade Center of Kentucky, I had a very good relationship with them. And also, so a lot of this stuff, to be clear, I did for free. And towards the end, it was actually costing me money because I was traveling so much. I was taking, so in 2016, 17, and 18, I was taking 60 to 70 flights a year. So I was on a plane every week, or oftentimes more than once a week. And so, like, they'd have a talk in Cincinnati, like the World Trade Center, Kentucky would have an event in Cincinnati, and they're like, we'd love for you to come. And it would be this, 25 people in a room, like a trade, training for people in trade. And so I'd literally fly into CVG in the Cincinnati airport that morning, get a car, go give the talk, fly back out that afternoon. So like that whole thing would cost me $500 or more. And but all I wanted, those 25 people in the room, I wanted one of them to say, wow, that guy's smart. He should really talk to blah, 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 blah. And that worked. It worked also because I'd add them on LinkedIn. I had this whole process. Like I'd send a follow-up. I would say, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Here's the slides I gave. Blah, blah, blah. And then, let's say 2 years later, like now, or 3 years later, 4 years later, I'll reach out to those same people. Like one of them who came to my talk probably 4 or 5 years ago now works at Valvoline, and she runs a marketing team at Valvoline. And I reached out to her on LinkedIn, and I was like, hi, got this new company. And, would you be willing to hop on a call and just give me feedback about this product? And she responded right back, and she goes, yeah, I would love to. And so those types of things, are hard to see the value of up front, but there is no doubt that now I have this large network that partially is because of all this speaking that at the time may have had a small ROI, but over time has really, really built up and created something really valuable for me.
That's all right. That'd be a recommendation. I've done some that I'd like to give to our audience. I'll probably put some of the notes in the section. I've done a little bit of speaking, nothing to that extent. I mean, 40 times a year is pretty successful, but I don't know, the most I probably did in a year was probably like 10 or 15. Right. And I had some like epic fails. So I mean, some where it's like everything is flat in the audience. It's like, I was told I'm speaking to dentists. These are horticulturists. Like, how did this get messed up? You have like a whole
Oh, it's so true.
talk, you know, you got to do on the fly. Yeah. Did you in that? Did you have any that you're like, okay, this is not what it was intended to be, or is that just John luck?
Oh yeah. Oh
Like,
no, no, no.
all right,
Yeah,
give it.
I had a lot that I was like, man, because you know, so much of it, I think for you and I both, we're very similar in this way. Like comedy is a big part of who you and I both are.
Yeah.
And so when my jokes don't hit, like when I don't hear you laughing, it ruins me. I have no confidence. I'm like firing out of a cannon, like what I think, and based on, you know, objective proof or funny jokes. And then there's like, they just land dead, and I'm just ruined. I like wither away, and I'm like, well, then you just do the thing, and just like I speak in this very meek way, and it's just ruined.
No, I'm with you. And it like speeds up intensely, you know, at that point. We're like, okay, all right, we're just gonna, you know, and then you're like, this part doesn't matter that much. And you're just like, let me get out of here. And then you see the face on like, you know, the MC, and they look at you and you're like, oh, how was that? And they're like, I'm not gonna tell you it was bad, but I'm not gonna tell you it was good either. Yeah. Okay, all right.
They're like, nice try.
Yeah. All right. So based on your LinkedIn profile, you started a company called Stark9. It looks pretty similar to Uber for cabs. Did you try to build the Uber for cabs, Taylor? Were you on the other side of disruption here?
I gotta say, you're research people, very thorough. So, we built a texting, what year is that? So it would have been in like 2012, we built this texting platform for Yellow Cab. We had been playing around with Twilio, which at the time, you know, was pretty bleeding edge stuff, and especially in Kentucky. And so we built this kind of proof of concept for texting. I had a connection at Yellow Cab. I showed it to them, and they said, hey, we want that. And so I went in there with literally like wireframes, like drawn, pretty, like huge wireframes. And I told them that it was real. And of course it wasn't, because if it was, why would I bring you these big sheets of paper? Like I would just show you the platform. And so they're like, okay, we'll buy it. I was like, oh shit. So then we had 6 weeks to build a platform that would allow people, 6 weeks to build a platform that would allow you to text a phone number and say, I'm at the corner of, 4th Street and whatever, Main Street. And so we did it. We launched it. We had to build it in 6 weeks. We launched it. And then I went in there. We had to train their whole call center staff. You know, they run 24/7. They have these, people in Louisville and in Lexington and Kentucky. And that was really, at the time, especially we weren't on the coast. So this was like bleeding edge stuff. We had all these coasters printed up, and we were gaining a lot of traction. And I had people coming to me and saying, hey, we'll invest money in this company, and you should get rid of your agency and just do this. And then that was really when I started to let a lot of this go to my head. I was like, wow, man, I am really smart. And then, there was the thunderous crash in 2014. I tried to sell the company and couldn't do anything. But in 2012 and 2013, I was like, all right. So I ended up spinning out those assets into a company called Stark9. I put in a whole bunch of money, 6 figures. And then we raised some money from a local venture capital firm. I hired a small team. We ran out of all the money, and eventually I shut it down. So we weren't trying to be Uber at all. We were really more like we were trying to merge. Eventually, we tried to merge text messaging with live chat. So if you went to a website's mobile site, it would say, "Hey, text us your questions." If you went to their desktop site, you would see a live chat pop up. So we built all that, and so we built a lot of good IP. It was called Chat Blend, and it was good, but eventually you can't run 2 companies, or I could not run 2 companies, and so it didn't work out.
Okay, so you essentially just let it go.
Just let it go, yeah.
I think it was smart of you to take something that was inside your company, spin it off as something else. I know a lot of others that they'll have this, especially agencies, are like, oh yeah, this is this kind of thing that we're doing, and it's never taken serious to the extent that it should be for it to get the legs necessary that if it's going to one day, walk then run and potentially fly, it's never going to happen. I've heard some really cool ideas too. I'm like, oh, you can spin that off, and people are like, yeah, we can do that. I'm like, all right, cool. Then don't fucking do it. You know? You're just going to fail, because if you don't treat it seriously, it never gets to change.
So I totally agree. And you know, the best advice that I completely ignored is that running a services business is nothing like running a software company. You know, running a tech or a software company is, you know, oftentimes loses money. You have to raise money, you know, and then running a services business, if you're not profitable, that's a real problem. And so like they're just very different ways of being. The cultures are different. The sales is different. You know, at Blackstone, my average sale was 75 to 150 grand. And so that's very involved, you know, like I'm going out there, you have lots of in-person meetings, you know, I can fly there. For a software product that is $1,000 a year, you're not doing any of that stuff. Like none of the sales techniques that I learned in Blackstone even applied to the software business, because they don't work. Like the relationship building, all that, like, what the hell am I building a relationship for $1,000? Like, I'm gonna run out of money. So it's just very, very different, and I didn't appreciate that at the time.
I see. So it's more transactional, is what you're saying. You need to spend your time wisely, essentially get in and get out.
So exactly, and so for Blackstone, my last company, my whole goal was to get on the phone with you or to get in a meeting with you. That was the whole goal. You know, we were a razz and dazzle. You know, I was an in-person guy. Like, you know, when you were around me, if you were a client or a prospect, we sold projects because you were like, this sounds awesome, we'll buy it. You know, that was it. Whereas in software, that doesn't scale. That doesn't work. You know, they can't be impressed by me. They have to be impressed by software. The software has to stand on its own. And that's, you know, it's very expensive.
You were the product at Blackstone. That's what they were buying. And granted, all of these other results, but they're literally buying in, they trust you. Last name Trusty, that's a great name. It doesn't get any better than that. I come in with Tsourakis and they're like, what does that mean? You know, I'll tell them, you know, it means power in Greek. They're like, really? I'm like, no.
You should start saying it means trust in Greek. Then
I could. That's a great point. But yeah, to that, they were buying you, and then in moving it over, did you hire? Have you hired like a consultant or a developer that knows this space to sell product-based solutions rather than service-based?
Oh, for the new company?
Yeah.
Well, we raised the price. So in the new company,
it's
a lot more expensive.
Don't buy in Taylor. You know, 1,000? No, it's 10,000 now.
Yeah, it's 20 grand. So you know, I realized that I don't like selling things that are $1,000 or $500. Like that's not I'm an enterprise B2B sales guy. Like that's the stuff I like. I like relationship sales. And so there are ways of doing that in software too.
So I mean, I think it's the smartest play. You took what you learned from something before rather than trying to completely reinvent it. And
exactly.
The simple solution is to raise your price.
Well, I mean, you know, I'm selling. I have a whole different product now. I mean, the new business is, you know, aggregating public information and then creating competitive dashboards. So like, what happened in your industry last week? What happened in your industry last month? You know, website changes, software, you know, social media, what happened in the news. So if I roll up data about your competitors, run it through some machine learning, and show you a pretty report, I mean, that's what we're selling there.
All right, so let's jump right in, because that's one of the questions I have. All right, since after starting your other agency, you do have these two other ventures, right? You got Signal Insights, by the way, which you need some SEO for, and Trusty Index. So Signal Insights, is that what you're speaking about right there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go ahead and get a shameless, you know, push and press. Go ahead and pitch me on it. What's your pitch? Give me your pitch.
So if you're in the forklift business and you manufacture forklifts, then you want to know, so who we're selling to are, and this is what we learned at Blackstone. What I learned at Blackstone is that you hired me. We didn't sell to entrepreneurs. I didn't sell to startup people. I didn't sell to tech people. Those people were terrible customers. You know, I sold to like enterprise middle managers in marketing, like brand managers. Like they weren't super senior. We don't want junior people. We want the ambitious middle managers, right? And so these people, they need ammo to get to be better at their jobs. And so also in large companies, if you have 30,000 employees or 300,000 employees, there's politics. There's all these games that must be played when you're in that level. Mm-hmm. We give data to those middle managers so they look really, really smart in meetings. I mean, at the end of the day, like that's my value proposition. You're paying me $20,000 a year so that I can tell you before any of your colleagues know, before your boss knows, that your largest competitor just opened an office in South Korea, that your largest competitor just announced layoffs in Ohio, that your largest competitor just bought another company or just raised, they just raised $200 million investment from a private equity firm to invest in their company, or that they're hiring right now a senior vice president of e-commerce. They've never entered e-commerce before. And so that's the idea is what are my competitors doing that I should know about so that I can, use that. So I can use that either for myself so that we can build out a campaign, or so that I can tell my salespeople, or I can tell my marketing team. Or when I'm in a board meeting or when I'm in a management meeting, I bring those things up so I look really, really smart. I'm on top of things. I know what I'm doing. And then because we know that those people get promoted. We know that the most connected, that those people get promoted. And that's what I learned in my last company. At the end, towards the end, my slide deck, like my second slide said 67% of our clients get promoted within 2 years.
Total.
That's what I was selling. No, it's true.
They probably
it wasn't 60.
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't 67%, but it was like what I don't remember the percentage now. But
I'm a marketer, bro. You don't have to tell me. I mean, just put a number to it, and they're gonna understand it. Yeah, I love it. The whole point is the people that work with you. There's a percentage of them that get promoted.
Some percentage get promoted.
Yeah. But it's possible that people just growing in their careers will get promoted, but also when they work with Blackstone and Taylor Trusty, they get promoted too.
And exactly.
It's a great slide. Don't get me wrong. I love that. I think it's strong.
Ambitious people get promoted anyway, but
right.
What if? Yeah, exactly.
Got it. I just when you said ambitious, I just pictured like all these like young people just stepping on the heads of others, just like So
exactly.
You give them the ability to, at a glance, to see. You like that name, by the way, don't you?
I love that. I know. I actually, after we talked, you told me about the glance thing before. And I sent all these messages to my co-founder. I was like, I really love this whole glance concept.
He didn't like it.
Yeah, well,
It's cool, dude. It's cool. I got a thick skin. He didn't like it. And just for our listeners, Taylor, I got a quick look at his product, Signal Insights. And I told him, I was like, I like the name Glance, something with a glance, because essentially what that product does is it gives you a glance. And he tried to, sell it to his business partner, and obviously it didn't work. No, and I'm not hurt by it, but that's what it does, right? So like, let's say that I'm, like you said, I'm a middle manager. I need a report. I'm going to quickly look up insights based on competitors, other people that are in the industry, kind of like a LinkedIn on steroids to some extent, really honed into the things that I want to see. And then from that, I can go into my meeting. I look like I know what I'm talking about, and potentially influence decisions that are going to get me promoted. That's kind of that whole buyer persona and the need all come to crest. Okay, got it. So with that, how do you sell that?
Well, I mean, we're early, right? But so far, the way we're selling it is, what I've talked about it is the network and the relationships. Mm-hmm. So far, it has been some relationship sellings. So it's, hey, you know me, you worked with me, let me show you this. And then a certain percentage of those people have said, I'll buy it. And then there's this, but there's only so many of those people. As you have a bunch of those relationships too. And then we go out to the second ring, which are people that, met me at events, or I spoke at a conference and they saw me, or, there's a lot more of those people. And they'll take a meeting with me to be kind, but they're not going to buy from me because they're nice. But then that was the much more impressive to me group, because those people had no real allegiance to me. They just knew me. And then, so we signed 3 letters of intent, so with some big names. And then we had some big kind of like, they're like, I'm interested. I can't sign a letter of intent because of the way our company works, but I'm very interested. And we had a number of those as well.
Sound like I thought you were ambitious.
Oh, let's say again. Oh, that's the pitch to them. Yeah, you're right. So, so far it has been that, it's been relationship selling. Now that we've raised money, we're, we have a whole other piece that'll be ramping up. But, the short answer is that I'm not sure yet. That's what we're going to figure out over the next 6 to 9 months.
Okay. All right. And I'll make sure that I share this company's information in the show notes. And next important question is, apparently you're a bourbon drinker from Kentucky. Not too original, by the way, but you say your favorite is Maker's 46. But I guess my main question here is, how do you feel about everybody? Everybody's a bourbon snob now. Everybody. I got close friends that are just like, oh, I'm like, dude, you've never drinking bourbon in your life. And now we're drinking bourbon together. And he knows everything about bourbon. I'm in a bourbon group, by the way.
What's funny is that people, they do this, right? So exactly what you're saying. There's this like, oh my God, I'm an expert. And then I'm actually wearing a bourbon shirt right now. And so then I just tell people, like, to those people, the ultimate way to like pull them back a bit is I'm like, oh, I'm from Kentucky. And then it's just, like, it all just goes away.
Oh, they get intimidated. They get, oh, wow.
Like, oh, wow. The truth is that I'm like no expert. I mean, I've been to a bunch of distilleries only because I live there. I've been to all the good ones. And when I have friends in town, or when we used to have clients when I lived there, we would take them there. And now it's a whole different ballgame. It's urban. There's these urban bourbon distilleries that are actually in the city. They're in Louisville. You don't even have to go out to the countryside anymore. But I like bourbon.
You're not an alcoholic, is that what you're saying? We need to put a disclaimer here.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm actually more proud of it now than I'm outside of Kentucky. Everybody in Kentucky is a bourbon expert, and so when I moved here, I started to build a network here. It actually became much more of my identity than it was down there. Like University of Kentucky basketball. I was always a Kentucky fan, but here it's like a way of, it's a connection back to home. And so, yeah. So but anyway, I'm not like this huge bourbon aficionado, with private barrels and all that kind of thing. I'm just a fan.
All right, give it time. You don't know. I mean, you could grow into that up there. And it could be wearing a shirt. That's a pretty strong identity piece, Like a Russian wearing a vodka shirt.
It's true. I actually have a number of shirts like this. So you're right. It is part of my identity.
All right. So I know, where do you think other agencies and companies are missing out in marketing today? I know you're doing all these talks. You're an expert. You've probably been researching the hell out of this because you have another company that does some type of, you do consulting on the side. Where are companies losing out?
Which type of companies?
So I would say companies in general when it comes to what you know about digital marketing. Like,
well, I think that they don't do enough user research. And so when I talk with people about user research, they say, oh, I talk to our customers all the time. And it's like, yeah, that's the problem, is that you're talking to them. You have a bias. All these people we all have biases. When I talk to my old clients, they would tell me things because they want to be nice to me. There's no incentive for them to tell me the truth. They want to tell me because they have to work with me, right? They would tell me what I want to hear. For instance, if they had an issue with one of my employees, this happened so many times. I would go and I'd be like, hey, blah, blah, blah is no longer on your account. And they'd say, oh no, what happened? And I'm like, oh, they've just moved on. They'd figure out that we let them go. And then the client would say, oh man, I never liked da da da. I had this issue and I had this and this and this. Yeah. And I'm like, bro, why didn't you tell me that? And these are a lot of these people I felt really close to. These people I had drinks with and everything else. And it's because it's hard, in relationships where a lot of these relationships last years and there's a lot of money involved and everything else. I think it's difficult. And so I say that because I think a big gap is in having an independent entity that does these types of, could be usability testing, could be customer interviews, it could be any of these types of things. And the truth is, we did some of this at Blackstone. I do very little of it on the side, so I'm not pitching myself. I'm saying that, hiring somebody if that's what they do once a year can really speak dividends.
It's like a secret shopping with your clients to some extent.
Exactly. So it's like interviewing the clients. I mean, we did this for clients of ours at Blackstone, where we'd interview their customers, and we'd say, what do you love about da da da? What could be improved? You'd be amazed at what these people would say.
Really?
Oh yeah. And
what does that cost?
So the challenge, well, like what we charged. So we would charge 20 to 50 grand.
For this interview process, them interviewing to find out whether you guys potentially suck or not? Maybe I'm not fulfilled.
So we'd interview their customers. Well, the challenge, of course, is that from a customer's perspective, like what is their incentive? What is the customer's incentive, the end user? Like why should I talk to you, John? Like why should I tell you what I think about our mutual client, Fred?
Yeah.
And so the challenge is that the actual conversations could only take 45 minutes, but the build up and making sure the conversation happens and scheduling it and doing the proper introductions, because if the email comes from my team or comes from, whoever, it doesn't work as well. It has to come from the customer's contact, the client contact for the customer. Like that's the ideal way is for, the account manager on that account to say, hey, Fred, it would really mean a lot to me if you would do this interview over the next 2 weeks with Taylor's team. I've copied Taylor here. He's going to reach out to schedule some time, and please be honest. Thanks so much. And that process works really, really well. So if it's that personal introduction, and then, there's questions around confidentiality, right? So if I'm the end customer and if I share these things with you, if I say, hey, here's my concerns, is this held confidentially, right? So then you have a challenge around, if it is confidential, how do you roll this up to the client to make it valuable? If it's not confidential, then how much am I going to be willing to share? So there's all these kind of lines to walk. And, do you share transcripts or recordings of the calls? Like, there are a lot of questions there to walk through, and it kind of depends on the client. But I think that, to answer your question, I think that that's a big gap, is in fully understanding, especially in relationship businesses, how that works. And there are ways of doing it a lot cheaper too. So you could do usability testing, using like usertesting.com or Userlytics, that type of thing, where you can find users that fit the target demographic and have them go to your website, go to competitor websites, and speak their mind, say what's working and what's not.
So, okay. So I think I got a little bit confused. So it sounds like what you're saying is it benefits you, or it benefits a company to hire a third party to dig into their customer to get a better understanding of them, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. And then what I found interesting though, is you said when you would fire somebody or let them go or graduate them, however you want to, say that, you would find out from your clients that they're like, oh yeah, Randy, yeah, he's a piece of shit. I'm happy he's gone. But you never knew that, correct?
Correct.
Did you though do surveys with your clients to potentially uncover that with another third party?
So that's a good question. So we did in a way, but no, not like fully like that.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I think that's potentially a business that somebody could sell to agencies or something, or maybe this already exists and I'm just naive enough where I don't know this. Oh, speaking of naive, this has happened on a couple other podcasts. Do you know what STEM means?
Science, technology, engineering, and math.
Everybody knows that. I didn't know that. Isn't that amazing?
Isn't there another one now? It's like STEAM. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Art, STEAM. They add arts or something.
All right.
STEAM, seems not related to others.
And I guess one of the things before we get out, you sold. What would you call that that interview process, getting a better understanding? Did you just lump it into that buyer persona, which ranges, by the way, to something some people offer for free, and then something, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars? Or would you package it as something else?
So we had like a number of names for this, but we call it the Blackstone discovery process. Our company name is Blackstone Media, and so we called it ID for like intense discovery or immersive discovery. But really, we just called it discovery. So we'd come in and say, we have this discovery engagement. This is what it looks like. We'll interview your customers. We'll do usability testing. We do wireframing. We do a whole workshop with your team. So it was pretty intense, right? So you usually do a 1-day or 2-day workshop. We'd come up with buyer personas. We did a lot of work there. And the trouble is that a lot of people don't want that. And so what we said is, if you don't want that, then we're not the right fit for you. And that became, it was good on one hand, but over time, it's a struggle, because some of these companies don't want that, or they don't want to pay for that. Or, they're like, well, we already did that with a branding agency. Can I just give you what they did? And so, yeah.
Okay, now, I've dealt with that, right? So at one time, I was like, nope, if they're not going to pay our flat discovery fee, we're not going to work with them. And then I saw the bank account dwindle. I was like, you know what? If we're going to figure out a way, and we tried, all right. And then now I think this is the way that we broke it up, right? So the only time I really charge it is, or not charge it when we do it, is if we just really do not understand what the hell it is that we need to do, right? Like, we literally need to build a strategy. Like, okay, well, you're going to have to pay for that. The other signifier is, especially when somebody says they don't have a budget. You don't have a budget. If we're going to work a problem backward and figure out what that budget should be, that is something that you have to pay for, because that's a lot of work, and it's a lot of guessing. I try to remove as much guessing as possible. But yeah, I implore everybody to attempt to sell a discovery the best that they can. And for those that are like, oh, if you don't want to pay our fee, don't work with us. I think that's amazing too. I'd love to potentially be in that position. But then I think the other side of me is not where I am. If I sit down and it's a pretty rudimentary problem to solve, even if it's a budget like, hey, we need, $8,000 to $10,000 a month in X. Sometimes we can literally just write a scope and we can crush it, based on that. And it's a really good understanding of that customer. Let's say that you take like an electrical contractor services, right? That homeowner, like, we don't need to do that much of a discovery of what that is. But now when we go into, let's say that somebody's developing, missile components or something like that. And then there's this really weird relationship, and it's like trade show based, and we're going to figure out. At that point, we're like, I don't know what the fuck we're doing. We don't even know anything about this. Just being really forward with the client and telling them, like, all right, yeah, we don't know. I don't think there's anybody's specialty in this. Can we all just sit down, figure this out, and we think it's worth paying for? Is that kind of that approach that you had?
So and you hit the nail on the head. We would come in. So at Blackstone, we got we did a lot of business to business manufacturing. So it became a target for us and everything. So we'd come in and we'd pitch and we'd say, hey, we have all these clients that are in similar business to you, and we understand all that. And they'd say, great. And then we'd get down to how much things would cost, and we'd start talking about discovery. And we're like, hey, we need to interview your customers. I need to understand your competitors and your industry. And so and they're like, well, wait a minute. You just told me that you have all this experience. And, the savvy ones would say that. So they'd say, wait, you just said it. Part of the reason you're here is because you have all this experience in the industry. So it's kind of difficult to have it both ways. Where charging, it's like, hey, so then, and I think that was something that we stuck to our guns on too much. To your point, we were like, nope, you got to pay this amount. And I think that we would have been really better served by saying, this is normally $20,000. However, I know a lot about your industry, so I'm going to sell it to you for $7,500. And these are the things I already know, and I know about your competitors, and I know the way you sell, and and that approach I think would have been much more successful than just this, nope, you have to buy it this way. I think we got arrogant in some ways, especially since, I had a very, very, very large client that was, we did a lot of business with. And so on some level, I'm like, well, I'd rather just sell Toyota more engagements than this. And I think that hurt in some ways. in the growth. Even though we were growing, I got too arrogant in that way.
No, that happens, man. Yeah, I get that. And I think organically, the process that you just mentioned, that's how we do. Like every single one is priced differently, and we get the customer really involved. In fact, I'm actually going to publish a blog post on it because I think a lot of agencies would benefit from that. Because if we're all paying for strategy, and I mean like a real strategy, not like oh yeah, we do strategies. This is yeah, no, okay. If you can't tell me how you're going to do what you're going to do, that's you don't have a strategy, and it should be a really succinct statement. So no, I think that's fantastic that you shared that, and now I just announced that I'm going to create that blog post, so I kind of have to.
Now you have to do it.
All right. So, is there anything that I didn't cover that the world should know, either about you or anything you want to peddle?
Yeah, I think that nothing to peddle, but I think that we don't talk enough as entrepreneurs, as small business owners, about.
All right, that's cool, man.
About the emotional journey that oftentimes is not great. And so by that, I mean, there's not enough conversation, especially when you go to networking. When I went to networking events and things like that, everybody's killing it. Everybody's doing so well. Everybody, and we don't talk enough about that journey. And some of this is, people like Brad Feld talking about this openly. But we all experience that downside of the roller coaster. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that there's enough conversation about those things. We've talked a little bit about it on this podcast. I wish that we talked more openly about it, especially as men. Like I think that in some ways it's hard to do, and I wish that this was a larger part of the conversation is about. I'm not talking about this podcast. I just mean in general as entrepreneurs. I joined an entrepreneur group called Entrepreneurs Organization, this global nonprofit. Mm-hmm. I'm on the board of EO New York, and I found so much value, and part of the value in EO is that it's confidential, and it's this like peer group. It's like you and I are peers, John, and I know you and I have had some intense conversations like that. The laughter and the fun and all that is wonderful, and I love that. I almost think there's as much value, and I'm really struggling with this, mm-hmm. and being able to be vulnerable in a safe way. And it's like, what? I've actually experienced that exact same thing, or you're not alone in that. And when I was selling my business, there were a number of things that happened during due diligence. I can't really talk about publicly, unfortunately, but that I felt like I was an idiot. How come I didn't see that? I felt betrayed, or I had all these feelings, and I just thought that meant that I was a shitty business owner, or that I didn't plan accordingly. And then when I talked to more entrepreneurs who sold, I was like, oh my God, everybody goes through this. Like everybody who sells their business, they all feel this mm-hmm. same way. But the way they talk about it publicly oftentimes is, yeah, it was great. It was amazing. Fireworks. It was outstanding.
Champagne, bro.
Champagne everywhere. Like that is cool. But if our goal is to be valuable to each other, then I think that we should be more honest in that way. And so when I talk about my sale, people want to hear oftentimes about like the glory and all that. But really, it was difficult for me. And so if somebody on this podcast is having difficulty, especially around the sale or around transitions in that way, please reach out. Many have because I gave a talk for Techstars about this similar thing. And so that's it. We're all struggling in our own way, and even the people talking about how great and wonderful things are, have their own inner struggles. So keep at it.
I think that's fantastic. No, and I highly agree with that, man. I remember it was early when I first started my agency in 2009. I was having a conversation with this lady. I was pitching essentially like what I do, and she's like, "Well, congratulations for you going out on your own." And then she said the weirdest thing to me. She said, she gave me a high five, and she's like, "It's lonely at the top." And I remember I had like a dream. I was like, "What the fuck does that mean?" I was like, but at that moment, anytime and granted, there's been really times as, a business owner, Yeah, it's lonely. Like you gotta like do your work. If you're like, if you're not sensing that or even being comfortable at alone working on whatever you're working on, you're probably not meant to do whatever it is that you're doing, right? And I don't mean that you're like a complete introvert, because I am very much so an outrovert, extrovert. Jeez, man. I'll correct that in
The
post.
bourbon.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm a tequila guy, but anyway, yeah, I don't know anything about bourbon. But yeah. So and I think that's a really important thing. But knowing that it's okay to not, feel like perfect all the time, right? You have all these other people, like you said, that are always making everything look like it's absolutely amazing, never talking about the downsides of what they're going through. Shit is really hard. It gets really rough. You're not going to make the best decision every time. And I think social media kind of adds like a luster and a grandeur to that. But I think it's more important for groups, whether it's EO or like the digital mastermind, where we come together and we have those conversations, and really just get down and deep. I've gone through like, some personal development things that have helped me excel, not just in business or in sales or any of those like facets or nodes, but just personally in my life, where it's just like, yeah, I feel really happy. And knowing what to do when you don't feel happy is equally as important. I think a lot of people forget that. Like, all right, yeah, this too shall pass is not some, verse or thing that's over thresholds. It's really important to realize, yeah, it sucks right now, but there's a high probability it's going to be better,
100%. And without Digital Masterminds Group, I wouldn't have met you. I wouldn't have met Jeb. Those conversations, like going to the first DMG that was in Orlando, I think it was Orlando, and that was the first time when I was in a room and I could like model behavior. In other words, like I met somebody that I was like, I want to be like him, that was doing what I was doing. Like I met, successful people and whatnot, but in that room, I was like, oh my God, there's this like pathway towards me being a great agency owner. And that was kind of the first time that I saw that, especially in the agency business. And so I'm, so for agency people, DMG, or finding a peer group.
Love these plugs, bro. Love these plugs. Say DMG just one more time.
Finding these peer groups, I think, are one of the biggest and most important pieces of growing as an individual. Earlier today, I was texting back and forth. I'm an EO whore now. I mean, it's all over my Instagram. It's like, so people know me as being an EO. And so I get unsolicited text messages from like old friends who run companies now, whatnot. And I had one earlier today. I haven't talked to this guy in years. And he texted me and he goes, hey, I'm thinking of joining EO. What do you think? And so we went back and forth. We had this whole thing. And he's actually going to be in New York later next week. It's had this idea of peer groups, and whatever it is you pick, it's had such a profoundly positive impact on my life that I think that it's important for everyone.
I love that, man. All right. And to sum things up here, how can people get a hold of you if they want to get a hold of you, buddy?
You can go to taylortrusty.com. All my social media is on there, but you can reach out on Twitter and Trusty. But taylortrusty.com has everything, email and social media. So everything's listed up there.
I will put it in the show notes, brother. All right, man. Thank you so much for joining us, dude. I really appreciate it. We got to get together soon. I'll be in New York pretty soon.
Let's do it. Let's do drinks.
Oh, all right. Bye. I'm just
Thanks.
kidding.
See ya.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.